Hi everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just gonna wait just a minute before we get started.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you
All
are.
right. Good evening here from the Philippines. Good morning and good afternoon to wherever you are here in the world. Welcome everyone for our session for this day. Um, while we are waiting for others to come in, since it's just 3 minutes since we started, can I ask for people to introduce themselves in the chat and where are you calling from? All right, so that we can know where are you people calling. Um, I'm calling from the Philippines. May I know from others on the chat, please? Thanks, everyone. There. Thank you, Kevin. Kevin is from Kenya. I wonder what's the time there because here in the Philippines we're already at the evening. We have Sadie from London, Adam from UK, Ineza from Rwanda, Anna from Ireland. Wow. And Heater from US or USA. And then Farhana from Malaysia, Aziz from Nigeria, Sandra from Rwanda as well. All right. So good to see people from other parts of the world. Also, we have Saroj Thakur, if that's correct, from Nepal. Right. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeff, and thank for everyone who participated. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you for joining us for our session. But before we get into like the real essence of our session, maybe we would like to start first by going into the Mentimeter to share a little bit of like question and answers where we are going to know each other more better. I think my colleague has shared the link of the Mentimeter. So um, so we can start with the age. So we're going to choose
Hang on.
ourselves.
I think Aziz still has to share the link to the Mentimeter. Yeah.
Okay. and then the code is 8560844 2. Nice. We're going to give a couple minutes. So next question is about nationality. I'm waiting to see the answers. Ooh, Canada. We have Canadian. Filipino, Kenyan, Irish, American, Kenya, Malaysian. Next is, where are you based? Where are you taking the call from? London, Ireland, Kenya, Philippines, Atlanta, USA. Great. The next question is about the institution where you work with. It can be youth organization, academia, government, or NGO, or any other. The next question is, the level of your knowledge on loss and damage can be basic, beginner, medium, or expert. Is it expert? Yeah, I think. Thank you for participating. I think now we have a more idea of who are in our call. In our session. So allow me to introduce my colleague Sadie, who's going to give us a very good presentation on what is loss and damage, and by the same time try to really highlight the need and demand of the youth. So Sadie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ineza. I'm just going to give a brief introduction to loss and damage, and it's just an overview of kind of some of the that we've been doing and in general the topic itself. So when we're talking about loss and damage, we're talking about the costs of climate change that are not avoided through mitigation and adaptation. So really looking at those more severe and extreme climate impacts, weather events that are already happening and are going to get worse in the future. So when we're talking about loss, we're talking about things that are irreplaceable. So the loss of health, loss of lives, people's livelihoods, their culture and ecosystems. And when we talk about damage, we're talking about replaceable damage, such as infrastructure and property, schools, hospitals, roads, houses, that are damaged due to climate change, but can ostensibly be rebuilt. So loss and damage can be immediate, such as cyclones, wildfires, or glacial burst floods. And we've seen lots of examples of these in recent years. We also have slow onset loss and damage, which is essentially events that occur over a longer period of time, such as desertification, ocean acidification. There's a picture of the Great Barrier Reef, and sea level rise, which is having big effects in the Pacific Islands. So one example of loss and damage were the twin cyclones in Mozambique in 2019 that happened within 1 month of each other. And there was an enormous amount of damage. There were, I think, 2 million people affected. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced, and some of those people remain displaced today. And Mozambique didn't receive the support that it needed to recover from the cyclones, some of the strongest it's ever seen. And its economy and society remain challenged by the climate impact they faced 2 years ago. And some of those people who were displaced by the cyclones are still living in camps for displaced people. And so, yeah, looking at how loss and damage is dealt with on the ground, most of it is through humanitarian aid and support, as well as response by governments, in terms of so there's a photo here of the Red Cross and Red Crescent actually in Mozambique. They would deliver food, shelter, supplies to people, and they would help support communities in the ways they need. And loss and damage is also currently dealt with to some extent through adaptation projects. For example, through developing early warning systems to help warn people of oncoming disasters. But generally, this kind of disaster risk reduction and humanitarian sector and adaptation is simply not sufficient to deal with the increasing scale of how loss and damage is affecting people around the world. And that's why I often say loss and damage. And the reason for that is that loss and damage is already occurring and will continue to occur at a great scale. And yet the decision makers that are making policy around this are not accountable to people who are most affected by loss and damage from climate change. And the majority of people who did the least to cause climate change are the ones who are dealing with the effects of climate change. And I say you've never heard of it. Well, you might have heard of it as climate change professionals, but I think that in general, the public doesn't have a really good understanding of loss and damage. There are a lot of misconceptions about it, um, and also just the policy around it. I don't think people kind of connect the pieces in terms of like what's the responsibility of countries that have historically contributed a lot to pollution and have benefited from that and have also benefited from colonizing these same countries that are being really strongly affected by climate impacts. Um, so within the UN climate negotiations, loss and damage is dealt with through the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage, which has a mandate to address loss and damage associated with the impacts of climate change, enhance knowledge, strengthen dialogue, and enhance action and support, including through finance, technology, and capacity building. Loss and damage is also part of the Paris Agreement as Article 8, and is seen by many as the third pillar of the Paris Agreement after, in conjunction with mitigation and adaptation, as the next step on that spectrum of, of dealing with climate impacts. In terms of finance for paying for loss and damage, the estimated cost of loss and damage in 2020 was between 100 and 400 billion US dollars. Some estimates around loss and damage, it is challenging to measure, but by 2030, they estimate that the cost will be between 300 and $600 billion per year. And that by 2050, this cost could reach $1 to $2 trillion per year. And in terms of what finance is available for loss and damage, the designated funds from the International Climate Framework are $0 for loss and damage. That being said, some funding for adaptation and humanitarian sector does go toward loss and damage on the ground, of course, because we do send these responses in. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is that while loss and damage is the third pillar of the Paris Agreement, it's not respected as such with regard to how developed countries are providing climate finance. Especially, we've seen the goal for climate finance for governments to provide $100 billion per year by 2020. That countries have not really met this goal, and um, and so yeah, basically we've been pushing for countries to establish a new stream of finance for loss and damage. And that dovetails into what we hope to see at COP26. So as we mentioned, we've been pushing for governments to establish a new window of finance on loss and damage under the UNFCCC. And a lot of developing countries have been asking for the same, but developed countries have not been listening to their calls for increased finance and support. We also acknowledge that the Santiago Network for Loss and Damage, which is a new network that will be focusing on delivering technical support to countries on the ground so they can address loss and damage, is set for being established or operationalized at COP26. And we hope to see a Santiago network that is fit for purpose in terms of meeting the needs of countries on the ground in terms of how they address loss and damage. In terms of a general vision for the future, I think generally we hope that countries work together and implement ambitious mitigation and adaptation plans. But we do want to see compensation to the victims of climate disasters and reparation to people who were wronged by the injustices of big polluting countries that refuse to provide support for loss and damage. And ultimately, we want accountability from big polluters, be them both governments and the biggest polluting companies, such as fossil fuel companies. In terms of what we're doing at LDYC, the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition, we're telling stories about how loss and damage affects people from around the world. We're conducting advocacy to global leaders on how they can take action on loss and damage. For example, we've written open letters to the UK and US governments, and recently met with the COP26 President Alok Sharma. And we are training a new generation of youth leaders to be calling for justice on loss and damage. And our demands, which are ever evolving, sorry, I just dropped my pen, are to prioritize action on loss and damage, make it a political priority, to provide a new finance facility for loss and damage under the UNFCCC, to pledge finance, new and additional finance for that facility, to make loss and damage decision making inclusive for all stakeholders, especially those who are most affected by the impacts of climate change, and to meet with youth leaders such as LDYC to discuss how youth can be more involved in the process. And I think that is it for my presentation, and I am going to pass it back to Inessa.
Thank you so much, Sadie, for the presentation. I think we now have a more clear idea of what is the loss and damage policy and how it's being, and what is the hope that we want to see in the future. So on this note, allow me to introduce our youth speaker who are going to share their experience on how loss and damage interfere with their daily life. Our first speaker is Curver from Trinidad and Tobago. She's going to tell us how her life interfere with the loss and damage. Curver, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nazo. So a few years ago, I used to enjoy the rain during our rainy season, which is right now from June to November. But unfortunately, now that I am pursuing a career in disaster risk management, I am stressed when it rains because I constantly think of all the people who are possibly being flooded if it rains too long or too much. And I think this highlights the psychosocial aspect of loss and damage due to climate change. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, intense irregular rain events can hurt agriculture by damaging crops, and the flooding fuels the political tensions. And above average temperatures and increasing desertification affects respiratory patients, like those who suffer from asthma, which is exacerbated in the pandemic. Because we receive Saharan dust from the African continent, so as that gets worse, it's going to affect the region here in the Caribbean. And while my country does not experience severe hurricanes, or my island doesn't experience severe hurricanes as the more northern islands, like even Tobago, which is another island that forms parts of my country, and being slightly more north in latitude, they experience more severe hurricanes than we do in Trinidad. And other islands like Grenada, where they also experienced Hurricane Ivan in 2004, which decimated their internationally renowned agriculture industry, such as nutmeg, and also their tourism-based economy, which is common in the Caribbean owing to the colonial history. And my island, having a stronger economy, tends to cover the disaster response. And Tobago, relying on tourism, it's devastating when the coral reefs are experiencing bleaching or damaged by hurricanes. and fisher folks have to expose themselves to venture out to sea only to yield less abundant catches. And other islands in the Caribbean have similar experiences. Recently known would be Hurricane Maria that devastated Dominica in 2017 and Hurricane Dorian that devastated the Bahamas in 2019. And these stories illustrate the pressing concern of climate change here in the Caribbean and the loss and damage that results from the psychosocial effect of having to migrate, and illustrates the urgent need for loss and damage finance under the UNFCCC. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kavra, for your story. Now allow me to invite our second speaker, Kevin from Kenya. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, I can't turn on my video because I have a network problem. So when I turn on my video, I think it will interfere with the way I'm talking, because you are experiencing a lot of rainfall where I am. So it is interfering with the network, yeah. So yeah, here in Kenya, in East Africa, I think in 2020, most of the people, I think, you are out of this the desert swamp locusts, you see. And me knowing this, I think I was able to experience this, I think, through movie, when I was watching the movie of Moses, that is a biblical history. So during that time, the time I saw locusts on the video. But 2020, in the beginning of 2020, I think was my first time to see this swamp of desert locusts, which they were migrating from the other part of Somalia. And this one, that the raising of number of these desert locusts present can extremely alarm, threaten to food security and also livestock in East Africa. So, and most of the people were asking, I think also the scientists say, how can you maybe relate locusts with climate change, knowing that this was the major problem which we will experience in 2020, most of the East Africa country, that is Ethiopia, Uganda, Somalia, and Kenya, mostly Kenya, because these locusts destroy a lot of plantation. And through that, I think in our geography, we were able to know as there was this term known as Indian Ocean Dipolar, which was also known as Indian Nino. So this is an irregular oscillation of sea surface temperature in which climate system that affect weather from East Africa up to the other part of Western Australia. So this was the one which I think bring a lot of locusts, because most of these locusts were breeding in the other part of Somalia, and that Indian Ocean dipolar was moving to other part of Somalia, which bring the best breeding site for this locust invasion. So this is how we can relate climate change and locust invasion, knowing that this locust invasion was also due to also raise of temperature in Indian Ocean, knowing that Indian Ocean, how is this temperature raised, is due to melting of ice in Arctic and also in Antarctic. So when this ice melt, usually increase the body mass of the water in this Indian Ocean and also other ocean in Africa. So that is the way it led to this locust invasion. And I think it was really because it was scare most of the food security in Kenya. In the other part, especially these locusts were migrating from the desert region to the green, to mostly to the island region here in Kenya, and also here in Kenya, mostly in Rift Valley and other parts. And it destroyed a lot of plantation, not only destroy, also it interfere with most of the people's psychology, because most of these people were planting a large hectares of farm, depending on that in food security, and also to pay for their children fees, and also for Kenya economy. So when these locusts just land in a small, like maybe in an hectare, within the second, I think that when you go to visit that land, it's just plain, just eat everything. You see, so this is how most of the locusts, most in East Africa and also other part of because I also saw that we also locusts was also invaded in other part of Asia, that is India and other parts. So this is how these locusts interfere and also destroy large plantation here in Kenya. Yeah, thank you very much. It's just a short and brief.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kevin. I think I'm few of the people who do not know how to link locust and climate change, but now I think I do have an understanding on that one. So thank you so much. Allow me to invite our third speaker, Farhana. Farhana, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, can y'all hear me? All right, great.
Yes.
All right, thanks, Anissa. Malaysia is my home. Its subtropical climate, sunny rays, and high rises among lush greenery are as familiar to me as my name. Small changes in the environment throughout the years have accumulated to large climate impacts and make me fear for a future if significant climate action is continually ignored. Like many former colonial countries, the balance between economic development and environmental sustainability is tilted in the former, because economic superiority is favored globally, and this has resulted in increasingly severe climate impacts. Loss and damage come in many forms, sometimes obvious, other times not. Usually, loss and damage can be easily expressed as cost of damages as a direct result of climate impact. So, in Malaysia back in 2014, the expected monsoon season turned torrential, and the heavy rainfall caused a devastating flood. The state of Kelantan was severely affected, and this affected the northern and eastern parts of Malaysia. By the end of the storm, the estimated cost of damages was around 1 billion ringgit, or equivalent to 300 million US dollars. Though costly, the costs to well being and the quality of life were more. The flood left behind contaminated water, rubbish, and carcasses, which led to the foul odor that permeated the air. The situation was made worse with no electricity and no clean drinking water. This form of loss and damage is direct and immediate and would appropriately highlight loss and damage. However, an indirect and future loss and damage must also be highlighted. And this can be seen in another situation. In Gunung Kantan, in the state of Perak, is a historical limestone mountain. It is a national and spiritual heritage site and houses a diverse ecosystem. Gunung Kantan is poised for exploitation of its natural resources, but a greater cost because there is no price to history and culture. If there is a cost to that, it is under evaluated. So non-economic losses are not as prominent as economic losses because it is difficult to quantify. Therefore, we share our stories to share with you the true cost of loss and damage due to both natural and man-made climate impacts. Hence, the need for climate adaptation and mitigation measures, which ultimately require financing. As a youth in a country of the global south, I see the need for climate responsibility by my own country and neighboring countries, especially those in the global north who have and continue to benefit from our resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farhana, for sharing. And thankful everyone. I mean, for our speakers, because you brought to us like a lived experience of how loss and damage is being interfering with our life, and also from different perspective, different location. So we get to understand that the loss and damage is something that is happening everywhere. Before I think we're going to go in a small, in a breakout room session, small group, where we're going to discuss ourselves about how do we see loss and damage impact in our daily life. So on that note, let me invite my colleague, Jeff, so that he can introduce us to the breakout room session. Thanks. Jeff, the floor is yours.
All right. Hi again, everyone. I'm Jeff, and for the next part of the session, we are now going to have the breakout session. So will Aziz will put us to another room?
I'll do it. I think Aziz has had
All
network
right.
problems.
All right. So while CD is putting us into the breakout room, what are the thing that we are going to do is we are just going to discuss how LD or loss and damage affects our country, and how can the youth be involved in decision making regarding with the LDYC and into the process of championing loss and damage, specifically in attaining our goal to really have the justice for the things that mentioned by our speakers earlier. So yeah.
Great. So yeah, I'll be putting you into just two groups. And the first question is how does loss and damage affect your country and community? And I'll open the rooms. You have some time. I think if you want to join the first room in Nisa, I'll actually maybe yeah, I'll join as well. You're muted.
Okay. I'll join the number one.
Okay.
And I think the others are not yet done. Let's wait for others. Yeah.
I previously shared the article on the turtle eggs, just if anyone was like ever curious. It was just yeah, it's those small issues that affect I think only people who live in the country will know
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. It's really interesting.
I actually, yeah, thanks for sharing. I actually opened it and I'm currently reading it.
I think that's also probably one of the things that, like, that's a really good example of why it's so important to have locally led action because it's issues that you only are aware of when you are, you know, in the context. And so I think that's one of the things with loss and damage. It's like I don't think reproducing the current system of like humanitarian aid or any of those structures as they function now is the way to address it. And I think that's kind of one of the things that I find um, harder to maybe have a vision for what that future looks like in terms of changing those really entrenched power structures where people who control the money decide what happens. And I think that's one of the big things with the loss and damage agenda. It's like shifting, so it's like a bottom up process rather than a top down one.
Totally. And I also think like there's another thing is like it's just complacency and a bit laziness because I think in some cases if they see one country's structure or model for addressing certain issues, they just copy that same model and it doesn't work that way. It may not necessarily work. Like I think like even like I know that in Ireland your climate is wet and humid and a bit like and yeah it's not as sunny, but you not necessarily that same model can be applied to say Scotland even though you go to like neighboring countries. It's not going to work. So it's also that thing. And but I think a lot of it is just complacency and just maybe a bit of laziness.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, yeah, that's also so linked to culture and the importance of culture. So sorry, everyone's coming back because I'm going to mute myself.
Sorry, we didn't mean to. Jeff, did you want to lead the report back quickly?
All right, I think everyone is already here. So again, everyone, welcome to the plenary. So we just finished the our first breakout session. So I'm gonna report about the our inputs from our session. So basically, we just talk about how from the question itself that we just discussed how the loss and damage affect our countries and how can we be involved in this fight for loss and damage. So basically what we just discussed in our group, some of us mentioned that they love rains, but as time goes by, these rains become more and more wild, and it's becoming dangerous, that it costs lives, and it's not normal for us, because we love rain. We know that rain waters the ecosystem itself, etc. It has a lot of benefits, but then for other countries, rains bring catastrophes. And also one of the people inside the session discussed that they are trying to encourage the government to do more about what is going on into their country, which is the coastal erosion because of the sea level rise. And it's also good that she mentioned um, that although that her country is being affected by climate change, by the climate crisis, it's not an excuse, because other countries are also being affected, but in a larger scale. And others also mentioned that the cost of development of progress by nations, because as we all know, most of the raw and resources to make things are coming from the global south, but it's the countries who are doing this are they are the one who are being developed. They are the one who are progressing, and those countries uh, who this or where this raw materials are coming from, they are being left behind. And not just about development, but also how to handle disasters and post-disaster aids. And I think it's really good to know these things, because we can see that we are all affected by the loss and damage brought by the climate change, but it's different from it's different because we have different uh, contexts, we have different languages, we have different take on how to do these things or how to perceive this issue. So I think that's a great reminder that we are all affected, but at the same time, we are not the same, or we don't have the same contribution to the problem. That's it. I'll pass it to CD.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess in our breakout group, I think there was a lot of similarity in terms of like, I think there's examples really in every country of how loss and damage is having an impact, from, communities in the Arctic or in Alaska that are have melting sea ice, and that's leading to coastal erosion as well as sea level rise. And communities are thinking about relocation to Nepal, where from the monsoon season, like intense storms are causing hundreds of deaths each year. And then there's challenges with response times from the government, and also just building effective systems. Um, and yeah, so um, and and I think there's lots of great examples that came up in our group. Um, I think I wanted to transition to our next activity. Um, Basically, we're going to be having another breakout, but this one is going to be focused more on strategy. So basically, like what should the climate movement do? What overall needs to be done to take action on loss and damage? So there are three questions. One is, what should the climate movement do to make action on loss and damage a central priority for decision makers? What would action on loss and damage look like in your country or community? And drawing upon your own networks and spheres of influence, how can you contribute to driving action on loss and damage? And we've made a Jamboard for this. Aziz, I don't know if you can drop the link to Jamboards, and I'm going to send you back into the breakouts. So basically, room one, which is the one that Ineza and I were in, is going to be working on the first the first slides of the Jamboard. Um, and there'll be three different slides. And then room two will be working on the next three. So slides 4, 5, and 6. And feel free to take stickies from the left side and directly put them onto the Jamboard, as well as having your discussion. So please make sure that you have the link to the Jamboard open, and we'll send you into the groups. So the Jamboard link is in the chat there. Thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for a great discussion. We don't really have so much time left, but if I can invite someone from breakout room 2, so the one that I wasn't in, to share some highlights. Yes, if someone who wants to share just a few interesting things that they've seen.
I will nominate Sandra from our breakout room. Go, Sandra.
Jeff.
Just share whatever you want to share.
Well, from our breakout sessions, one thing I can share with you is that the youth should be involved. Like we don't need just to leave that the government or the other people. So we need to involve the youth. Also, we need to involve like the local community. Also involve people with no knowledge. Just share our knowledge so that we can all take action and do something about the loss and damage. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sandra. And we had a really interesting discussion in our group, and I really encourage people to take a look at all of the different slides in the Jamboard to see kind of the ideas that people have come up with. But I'm actually going to end the session there, just with respect to your guys' time. And I want to thank everyone so much for coming out today. I felt it was a really fruitful discussion in both of the breakout rooms. Yeah, I wish you guys all the best, and please feel free to contact us if you have any questions about the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition and our work. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.